This is going to be a first. This is an experiment. We're throwing some shit against the wall and see what the hell's going to happen. You know, years ago, before WWE took over the wrestling world, there was no AEW. There was a territorial system in the United States and Canada. We're going to talk about the Portland Wrestling Territory in Portland, Oregon. Portland Wrestling Territory was the Owens family. The Owens family in the 1930s to about 1990 ran professional wrestling in Oregon and Washington, or you would call that the Pacific Northwest. And that was Don Owen and Elton Owen. Elton was the old boxer who he would imitate and he would tell stories. And he was, put it this way, he was quite the character. And Don Owen, he would be wearing these wild ass suits. He's one of the nicest guys I've been around, one of the nicest payoff guys there was for money drawn. Over 60 years of wrestling in the Portland territory. But let's get started. In 1979, Lanny Poffo was wrestling for Don Owen. So I was sitting at home with Randy, and I was Rip Rogers there. So Lanny called Don Owen, and he got me booked out there. So I went out there and immediately hooked up with the legendary Playboy Buddy Rose. Now, the Portland territory was a bit different. Usually you had your territory and you worked your territory around your baby faces. But Buddy Rose was such a good performer. He was over so much. They made the territory around the heels. And when I first went out there, Roddy Piper was a heel. But Buddy was over so much, they turned Roddy Piper babyface, and they had the greatest feud they ever had for Don Owen. They worked for years against each other, and Buddy was just a heat magnet. He could kip up, he could do all the flips. And here he was, he looked like let's just say I call him a fat bastard. But he could do one-arm push-ups. He was so talented, and what a mind he had. He had a hair match with Rowdy Roddy Piper. Now, what you're looking at is they wrestle in Portland every Saturday night of the year, but once each month they would have a Portland special. And with a small crew out there, that's all the way they would see. This was before cable TV, but they had over 7,500 people paid to see Playboy Buddy Rose go up against Rowdy Roddy Piper in a hair match. And Buddy lost. Buddy had to get his head shaved, but Buddy was smart. After that, he wore a mask for a long time, but he had a blonde wig sewed on top of it. So the feud was continue, and they would always almost get that thing off, get that mask off of Buddy's head. And when they finally got it off, Piper pulled that mask off, Buddy hit him in the nuts, and he pinned Piper again, and all of his hair underneath had regrown back, and he had blonde hair again, and the Playboy and Roddy Piper continued their feud. It didn't get any better than that. Now, in Portland, Oregon, when I went out there, the guys in the territory, Ed Wiskowski was a great, great pro. Ed Wiskowski later on in the AWA became Colonel De Beers. Now, the Colonel was a legend. He was out there for a long time, and he showed me some of the nuances of, like, he'd go to his house and he'd pick up a lamp up, and on the bottom of it would be a picture with a certain female. Then he would turn the picture around, and there's a picture with him and Buddy with two other women. But I don't want to entice you and make you think that this is all perversion, etc. But it really is. So the Colonel De Beers, Ed Wiskowski, he was a great top pro. He was trained by the great Sonny Myers in St. Joe, Missouri. And then he was Derek Draper in Florida. But Ed was a great pro. He was a good guy, and we always had a good time. Now, Dutch Savage, he was a guy for Don Owen. He was like the so-called booker, but what he was when you would run certain towns, you'd only see Don in Portland, or you might see him in Seattle, and then you'd see Elton in the other towns. That meant every Thursday you were in Salem, every Friday you were in Eugene, every Saturday you were in Portland, every other Wednesday you were in Seattle. Then you would have Roseburg and Medford every other Tuesday and Wednesday, and then the rest would be spot shows. Now, in every territory, you had a specific place, usually where all the boys stayed, so that meant when all the boys were staying there, there was usually party time every night. Let's just say a lot of women would be hanging around, or if you was liking what you were and not girls, and it doesn't really matter. But we all stayed at the Bomber Hotel. That's right. The Bomber Hotel was a legendary place. They actually had a big old World War II plane sitting there, a bomber, at the gas pumps. That's why it was over. So there would be the Bushwhackers, Butch and Luke in one of the cabins. There's Salvatore Bellomo. There's Johnny Mantell. There's Iceman King Parsons. There's me right there. There's Buddy Rose visiting. And then it would just be after the matches every night, everybody would go to the Bomber. And let's just see, we would be partying a lot. Because I remember what I did was I flew out there. And, once Buddy took me to the Bomber, I bought me a $300 car that I could go to Sam LaPrinzi's gym every day and get my training in. Didn't take it on any trips or anything. And then when I left, I sold it to some guy at the Bomber for $300. So I actually drove her out there, or was driving around out there for free, because I went to every town with Buddy Rose. Buddy would take me to his apartment. He'd have Pepper, he had Pretzel, and Pepper, his 3 weenie dogs. And they was always on me, trying to bite me till he'd smack them, and then he'd give them a treat and they'd be okay. But the Playboy, I walked into his apartment. Now, Buddy was the first guy I'd ever seen that actually lived with 2 girls. So he was over with me. He was awesome. He was treated like the king. He had the big old chair where you'd sit back, lounge chair, or whatever you called the son of a bitch. And he had a huge, this was like when he had all of his matches on tape since he had been to Portland. And they had the big old wide tapes, like not 3/4, maybe it was 1-inch thing with a big old, looked like a movie projector screen. And this is the place. Jimmy Snuka was there about 9 years. And nobody knew who the hell Jimmy Snuka was till he left there. Then he was one of the greatest stars, one of the most humble guys. You know it, brother. Jimmy, we're working. What do you want to do? Just beat me up, brother. Now, Dutch Savage, his real name was Lionel Stewart, and he was a minority owner. So he would be hanging out at the Bomber to let Don Owens, if things got too rowdy. In other words, he was a stooge, and he got to take the money back to Don. So whatever he pocketed, and it was tough shit. But Don Owens was one of the greatest payoff men in professional wrestling. Now, the referee, the third man, whatever you want to call it, the enforcer, the general, was Dandy Sandy Barr. Now, Dandy Sandy Barr, that was Jesse Barr's father. That was Art Barr, who was Beetlejuice later on. That was his father. So Sandy ran the Portland Sports Arena, which also meant that he was there on Sunday when they had the flea market. So Sandy did about everything. Sandy was a good guy. He had some good kids. Now, Adrian Adonis, when Adrian was there, he was one of the tag team partners with Rotten Ron Starr. Adrian was a tough guy. He was sort of a bully. And I remember when Dan Spivey beat the shit out of Adrian, because Adrian was a tough guy, but he messed with Dan Spivey, and that didn't go too very good. But he was a pro, and he would sort of bully me, and then Piper told him not to bully me, so Adrian would let me call stuff. But what it was, Adrian was really talented, and he was a whole lot better than me, because when I was in the Portland territory, I basically wasn't worth a shit. I just didn't have an experience. I didn't have the time put in. You have 1,000 matches in 3 years, which is the way it used to be when you was in the territory, and you'd get good real fast. You could work babyface, heel. You could go back and forth. You could be different characters and stuff. Today's guys, it's not that way. If you have 2 matches a week, you're pretty much lucky, and it's with the same guys. Where you'd be working with guys. I remember being with Scotty McGee and then not see him again for 10 years. Then when you get back with somebody, you're talking shit. Well, what happened to this girl? What did you go after here? How's your dad? This and that. But such is life. So Rotten Ron Starr. Now, Rotten Ron Starr was there, and I always laughed, and we'd always just shake our head because we was in the Maritimes together. We was working for Ron Fuller together in Pensacola. We were in like 6 different places together, and we were always jockeying for like the top spot. But I said, Ron, who gives a shit? Because it's like night and day. He was a great wrestler. I was more of an entertainer, was what it was. So it wasn't like we were both power hitters or a singles hitter or 3-point shooters or a drop back quarterbacks. We were completely opposite ends of the spectrum, where I was great at one thing and I had my niche, and he was great at one thing and he had his niche. But Ron Starr, and I used to always rib him. He was a real Vietnam veteran, and his real name was Bobby Eugene Nutt. So as a rib, I'd always call him Bobby Eugene Nutt. He just always go, kayfabe that. Okay. I said, I didn't say that your name was Bobby Eugene Nutt, but what the hell? But he was a really good pro. Rowdy Roddy Piper. Now, I went out to Portland. Now, I'd seen all the magazines, and when you're talking about Roddy Piper, he broke into business when he was like 17 years old. So he got picked on a lot. But by the time I got out to Portland, he'd been a veteran. He'd worked on top in Hawaii. He had been a top heel in San Francisco. He had been a top heel in Los Angeles for Mike LaBelle. So Piper, he was known everywhere on the West Coast, because on the West Coast, you could work the territory in Hawaii. That was with The Rock's grandpa. You could work the Los Angeles territory, the San Francisco territory, the Portland territory. Then you could work the Vancouver territory in Canada, and go and stay a year for each one, and then start over again if you want. So you really didn't have to travel that much. Now in the Portland territory, there's a guy that's been in the news lately. Billy Jack Haynes was from there. Billy Jack was a tough guy, and when I was there, he was still a mark. And he was a tough looking guy. And I remember Buddy Rose would always mess with him and blow kisses to him and stuff. And I always thought Billy Jack, if he ever got out of hand, he was going to kill Buddy Rose. But Buddy made a lot of money, and Buddy worked with Billy Jack. And well, it's a different situation today, but Billy Jack Haynes, he was most famous for being a star in Portland wrestling. Now, Rick Martel at one time, he was the AWA heavyweight champion, and he was a buddy with Piper, and him and Piper lived together in Portland. And when Piper was when he was leaving to go Hawaii, I remember I was cleaning up his apartment because Piper said Piper was a pig, which was awesome. And then he had money everywhere, just quarters underneath the thing, but you could just pick up. He said, "Oh, you can have all the change. Just help me pick up." So I was just busy cleaning all that money up. So that was good with that. Now, what happened was Piper and Buddy Rose, they'd like to go to Hawaii for a vacation, just to get away from it. So they go in for a weekend, and they would convince. It was like Buddy convinced and Piper convinced the bushwhackers, who were the sheep herders then, Butch and Luke, to come to Portland. Now, the Royal Kangaroos, that was Johnny Boyd and Norman Frederick Charles. They worked in Portland for years. And when Butch went home back to New Zealand, he was Lukey's partner, and he was part of the sheep herders at one time. But usually the sheep herders, you'd be thinking then they were the bushwhackers. That was uh, that was Butchie and Luke. When I was in Portland, I remember that was Iceman King Parsons. He was a star in Dallas for years, and this was the first territory he had ever went to was Portland, so he learned there. And then Johnny Mantell was there. Johnny stayed with us at the Bomber, and he was always a good party guy. He was a good hand, and his brother was Ken Mantell, who was at one time who was the booker in Dallas. Oh, now I got to work with Don Leo Jonathan when Don Leo Jonathan came in. I remember it took a big old press slam from Don Leo, and it actually knocked the wind out of him. And he was just laughing. He wasn't going to cover me because I'd have to kick out. So I just laid in the ring and I was discombobulated, almost going hyperventilating. I said, man, you knocked me goddamn fucking silly. And he just fucking laughed. I said, please pin me. So he just pinned me. That's what a nice guy Don Leo was. Now, when you're talking about Portland, Oregon, you got to talk about Elton Owen stories. Now, Elton was a guy. Now, Don was a straight-laced guy, and Elton was, he was an ex-boxer. He had the old broken nose. He'd be talking about, hey, you out there getting blowjobs? And you just start laughing because it was Elton Owen. So Elton was sort of heel on you. I remember Adrian Adonis, we'd be working in Salem every Thursday night. And then Elton would come in. He'd be drinking vodka and orange juice or whatever it was. And then Adrian Adonis would zip his jacket with a blade. And then Piper would come by and throw fart spray on him. So Elton goes, who in the fuck's farting down here? Jesus Christ. But that was Elton. Now, one night, Piper, he said, we was in Eugene. So you got paid in cash when you worked for on certain towns. So we was in Eugene every Friday night. So Elton goes, Rip, come on up here. You're the first one out. Come on up and I'll pay you. So I get in line. Boom, well, I was the first one. So I went in and got paid to make my money. And here's Rip says, oh, Rip, you's on the opener. That's 6-0. Plus you had you got a good attitude. That's an extra $5. And then you worked real hard. That's an extra $5. And you got me a coffee early. That's an extra $5. So here's your pay, $75 for the opener. I said, okay, thanks. So I went back and just sat down because I'd been paid and was waiting on Buddy Rose. Piper goes, get in line again. I said, what? He said, get in line again. So I waited about 5 more guys, and Elton, he was like I am today. He couldn't remember shit. So I walked up and all of a sudden, Rip, here you are. So then he pays me again, the exact same thing, goes the exact same routine. Piper's just fucking laughing his ass off. The next day, Elton goes, Jesus Christ, did I overpay somebody? I was short on money last night. But Piper used to fuck with Elton because at the time Piper was like 26 years old, but he had been working for 9 years. So he was a veteran. He knew all the goddamn tricks, and he knew Elton like a book. So he could really fuck with you. I remember I was in the ring one night with fucking Piper. So we're having the stare down. He goes, just stare at me. Don't break character. So I'm trying to act like I'm a tough guy. So all of a sudden Piper sticks out his fucking tongue, and he's got a little piece of paper with a tape on it that says, fuck you. So he's going, it's going, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. So that was Rowdy Roddy fucking Piper. So I remember I was going to come in and I was going to go home, and then Piper said no. He said he just worked a match with me, and he just had me kill him. and I beat him in the end, and everybody was just, nobody beats Roddy Piper. So I got another big run out of it because Piper said, oh no, I'm laying down for you. That's the way it is. He liked working with me. He was always cool with me. So if you wanted to get over, Roddy Piper was the guy that could do it. So anyway, that's some Elton Owen stories. That's some Don Owen stories. That's some Buddy Rose stories. That's some stories on Portland, Oregon. Don't know how long I went. Can't read nothing, but that's the way it is. Just stories from Portland, Oregon. If I told you the same shit before, 10 years from now, if I'm still alive, I'll still be telling you the same old shit unless I forget about them. So Portland, Oregon was one of the greatest territories in the NWA. I was glad I went out there. I got to meet a lot of guys, had some great fucking matches. And then thank you, Don Owen, for having me out there. Thank you for having me out there, Elton Owen. Thanks for all the guys that had matches with me out there because I was the drill and shit. And under Buddy Rose, Roddy Piper, Rick Martel, Colonel De Beers, Dutch Savage, I got a hell of a lot better, and I was glad I went out there. If you like this video, check out the video on Randy Savage or check out the video on Adrian Street. They're both great.